fellow lexiphiles. This is Elizabeth, and thank you for joining me for another poetry break. Today, I wanted to share with you the poems of Lawrence Ferlinghetti, who we lost earlier this year in February at the age 101. Lawrence Ferlinghetti was associated with the Beat Poets movement, and he was not as well known as Allen Ginsberg or Jack Kerouac, but he did start the City Lights bookstore, which also published Allen Ginsberg's Howl, and was also involved in the subsequent obscenity trial. Today, I will be reading from the collection These Are My Rivers, so let's get started. Our first poem is called The Uses of Poetry. So what is the use of poetry these days? What use is it? What good is it? These days and nights in the age of Autogeddon, in which poetry is what has been paved over to make a freeway for the armies of the night. As in that Palm Paradiso just north of Nicaragua, where promises made in the plazas will be betrayed in the backcountry, or in the so-green fields of the Concord Naval Weapons Station, where armed trains run over green protesters, where poetry is made important by its absence. The absence of birds in a summer landscape, the lack of love in a bed at midnight, or the lack of light at high noon in high places. For even bad poetry has relevance for what it does not say, for what it leaves out. Yes, what of the sun streaming down in the meshes of morning? What of white nights and mouths of desire? Lips saying Lulu, Lulu over and over, and all things born with wings that sing. And far, far cries upon a beach at nightfall, and light that was ever on land and sea, and caverns measured out by man, where once the sacred rivers ran near cities by the sea, through which we walk and wander absently, astounded constantly by the mad spectacle of existence, and all these talking animals on wheels, heroes and heroines with 1,000 eyes, with bent hearts and hidden oversouls, with no more myths to call their own. Constantly astounded, as I am still, by these bare-faced bipeds in clothes, these stand-up tragedians, pale idols in the night streets, trance dancers in the dust of the last waltz. In this time of gridlock Autogeddon, where the voice of the poet still sounds distantly, the voice of the fourth person singular, the voice within the voice of the turtle, the face behind the face of the race, a book of light at night, the very voice of life as Whitman heard it, a wild, soft laughter. Ah, but to free it still from the word processor of the mind. And I am a reporter for a newspaper on another planet, come to file a down-to-earth story of the what, when, where, how, and why, of this astounding life down here, and of the strange clowns in control of it, the curious clowns in control of it, with hands upon the windowsills of dread demonic mills, casting their own dark shadows into the earth's great shadow, in the end of time unseen, in the supreme hashish of our dream. Our next poem is called, sorry, I have to stop. I'm sorry. Our next poem is called A Report on the Happening in Washington Square, San Francisco. When the lovely bride and groom came out onto the grand front steps of the Catholic Church of St. Peter and Paul at 4:32 in the afternoon, a knot of natives was waiting at the bottom of the steps, including a bunch of bridesmaids and family friends, all of whom were holding on to the straight strings of bright green balloons, which were the exact same green as the bridesmaids' dresses. And the bride was holding on to a pure white balloon, which was naturally the same as her wedding gown, and the groom was holding a black balloon that matched his black tailcoat. And the newlyweds proceeded to knot the strings of their two balloons together, and then with a kind of whoop let them soar away, while in the same instant all the people holding green balloons let go of theirs with a little cheer. And the beatific bride and her handsome groom laughed and waved as they descended towards the others, with never a look up at the balloons that were zooming straight up into the blue sky and becoming smaller and smaller every instant, while the newlyweds gaily climbed upon the waiting imitation San Francisco cable car upon which the bridesmaids were already perched. And nobody casting even a glance at the flying balloons that now seemed to be heading south over downtown San Francisco, with the black and white balloons keeping close together on their tether, while the green balloons started spreading out all over. And the groom and bride took their special seats at the front of the cable car, which wasn't a real cable car at all, since it had rubber wheels not attached to any cable, which would have restricted its destiny. And the happy couple were still waving and laughing and kissing each other, and then ringing and ringing the cable car bell, while the balloons that nobody looked at were now at least a couple miles high in the distant sky, that now seemed to be growing darker and darker with huge banks of cirrus clouds to the west, towards which the tiny balloons now turned like a flock of birds winging seaward, with the two of them still close together, while the others strung out further and further, so that they began to look like lost sheep in an alpine landscape of towering white mountains, while the cable car all of a sudden started up with a great clanging of its bell, and everyone cheered and waved without ever a look at the disappearing balloons of their lives so far away, now that they looked like very distant mountain climbers scaling the walls of great glaciers in the final working out of their separate fates, except for the two climbers still roped together. As the cable car zoomed westward on Filbert Street and on towards Russian Hill, over which, in farthest sky, still could be seen the tiny black dots of the climbers going higher and higher and disappearing into their destinies, in which even the two roped together would be in normal course of life, lose their breath, shrivel away, and fall to earth out of air. Our next poem is called Goya and the Sleep of Reason. The dark stone statue of Goya stands between the trees at the side entrance of the Museo del Prado. He wears a long greatcoat and carries a tall beaver hat. Larger than life, he strides forward purposefully on a pedestal on top of a four-sided bas relief carved into white stone, in which are depicted various struggling figures from his outrageous collection of humans and inhumans, at the base of which is incised, El sueño de la razón produce monstruos, A stone man sleeps or weeps right above the monsters with winged bats around him. The late morning sun glints off Goya, and shadows of the leaves of the acacia trees fall on him as if the leaves themselves were falling. They do not. I study his face for some small sign of recognition, but his long, hard look is directed beyond me. Reason sleeps beneath him, but above, against the sky's blue immensity, all is intensely awake in the steady and atrocious clarity of his distant gaze. This next poem is called "It Was a Face Which Darkness Could Kill." It was a face which darkness could kill in an instant, a face as easily hurt by laughter or light. We think differently at night, she once told me, lying back languidly. And she would quote Cocteau, "I feel there is an angel in me," she'd say, "who I am constantly shocking." Then she would smile and look away, light a cigarette for me, sigh and rise, and stretch her sweet anatomy. Let fall a stocking. And our final poem for today is called "Constantly Risking Absurdity." Constantly risking absurdity and death whenever he performs above the heads of his audience, the poet, like an acrobat, climbs on rhyme to a high wire of his own making and balances on I-beams above a sea of faces, paces his way to the other side of day, performing entree-shots and sleight-of-foot tricks, and other high theatrics, and all without mistaking anything for what it may not be. For he's the super-realist who must perforce perceive taught truth before the taking of each stance or step in his supposed advance toward that still higher perch where beauty stands and waits with gravity to start her death-defying leap. And he, a little Charlie Chaplin man, who may or may not catch her fair eternal form, spread-eagled in the empty air of existence. Thank you again for joining me today. I would like to highlight that we do have a couple of Lawrence Ferlinghetti's works on our Hoopla digital app, which is part of our digital library. So if you're curious, head over that way and see if you can check out his books. Have a good day, and I'll see you next time.